Let's now look at getElementsByClassName. Again, it's one of many ways to access the DOM. And I'm going to be moving a bit quicker now because I think that you're at the point where you're starting to become a lot more intuitive, a lot more at ease with these kind of things. Okay, so the only things I want to say about getElementsByClassName is one, it returns a live HTML collection. Again, don't worry, we're going to have a whole section on what these mean. And two, it only takes one argument, the class name or names that we want to access. With that said, let's jump over to the browser and start coding. As we've just discussed, one of the downsides of getElementById is that we can only grab one element at a time. So it's super annoying in many cases. Luckily for us, we've got other methods, and the one we're going to look at now is getElements, plural, by class name. As you can see here, my console's empty, and we have been writing code in the console, but it gets annoying because every time we refresh the page, it disappears. We have to rewrite code. So there's another way, and yes, we can write directly in our text editor in Visual Studio Code, but I want to get there a bit later. The next step I want us to take is I want us to create a snippet. Okay, within the browser still, but at least then it's permanent. So it is there every time we open up our browser. Great, but how does it work? Well, luckily it is super simple. It's in our browser, it's right by the console, but we just have to click on the sources tab. That's all we have to do. And then we can create a new snippet. And the reason I want to create a new snippet is just to make us more efficient. I don't want to keep rewriting the code every time we look at a different method. Okay, so let's just call the snippet DOM, for example, and here we go. We can actually start writing our JavaScript. And one of the first things I want to do is I want to define the color that we're going to be changing all our elements with, because I just don't want to be writing it out every time. So let's just say let color equal RGB. What was it? 132, 173, and 254. It's just a random color I chose. You can choose whatever color you want. But now we've got our color stored in a variable. So for example, if we use that ID method again, let header equals document getElementById, and we know it's got ID of header. We can now access our header, the style property, and we can change the background color to color. And if we run our code, there we go. It's literally done what we did before, which is very cool. And at the bottom here, we've actually got our console. Let me actually remove myself just so I don't get in the way of this console. Cheerio. So it's pretty cool, isn't it? Below we've got our console, and above we've got our snippet. So this was now, let's just say here, getElementById. That was method number 1. Now I want us to look at method number 2. I want us to look at getElementsByClassName. Okay, so how does this work? The best way to learn is by practical examples. So let's create a new variable called classElements. And of course, we're going to get it by accessing our document object. Remember, this is the root of our whole web page, which is why we have to keep going back to it. We have to start there as a base. And on this document object, we have a method called getElementsByClassName. getElementsByClassName. And the class name here is header. There you go. How do we know the class name is header? Well, of course, when we wrote up our HTML, we gave ourselves clues. And of course, within our actual HTML, we said it's got a class of header. But if you didn't have that, you could just get your inspector little arrow here and you can hover over it. And we can see that it's a div tag with a class of header. We went through this in the previous lecture. You should be very familiar with this by now. Okay, so what happens now when we run our code? Oh, you know what? I already ran this. So let me just refresh the page first. Let me just clear this console and let us run this code. So now we've run the code. This class elements, if we actually just go to our console and we type our class elements and we hit return on the keyboard, look what we have. We have an HTML collection. It's not an array. And in some ways it behaves like an array, but in other ways it doesn't. If we open up this HTML collection, we can see we've got our two divs, our two div headers. How awesome is that? And at this point, you might be thinking that you can just modify the background color the same way we did before. For example, you might think we can access our class elements, its style property, and of course, we want to change the background color to our color variable. But here we go, cannot set property background color of undefined. This is a very, very important point I want to make. This is not the same as getElementById. What? Why is this the case? Take a step back. We've just been told it's returned an HTML collection. And where is this HTML collection from? It actually is from the window object. If we console log the window out, and if we open up this window object, we should be able to find the HTML collection. Okay, and man, there's a lot of properties and methods on this. But if you keep scrolling down, we should be able to find the HTML collection. And there we go. There's the HTML collection type. That's what's returned to us. And as I mentioned, this HTML collection is not an array. And what I mean by that is if we access our class elements, which we know is an HTML collection, if we try and access our for each array method, which is straight out of the box from JavaScript, but it only works on arrays. And if we try and access this for each, and we say for each item, I don't know, console log the item. If we try and do this, what do you think is going to happen? Well, that's right. It's going to give us an error. It says class elements for each is not a function. Doesn't work. But remember in one of the previous lectures, we said this thing is so awkward, and it's awkward because some array methods do work, like the for loop will work. So if we go for I equals 0 and I is greater than the class elements, which is the HTML collection we've just created, on there's a length property. This is just a normal for loop. You should understand this should be very intuitive. And of course, we're opening up our loop here, and we're going to just access our class elements. And then we're just going to be iterating through each element within our collection. So now we've accessed where we are in the loop. We're going to access the style property, change the background color to color, and Bob's your uncle, we should be done.
Oh no!
Oh, that was silly. My I should be less than class elements.length. I don't know why I put greater than. That should be less than. And that should work now. Let's try it. There we go. So it's literally looped through every array. You can see on our HTML, it's actually changed the color to blue. How awesome is this? So just take a step back, realize that when we use getElementsByClassName, it returns an HTML collection. An HTML collection is not the same as an array. Why is it not the same? I don't know. It's just what the browser decided to give you and I. And it kind of makes sense. Like you can think of it as a collection. It's not necessarily a true JavaScript array. It's more a collection of, in this case, elements. Hope it's making sense. I hope you're having fun.